Okay, let's start with the scene. Picture it. It's spring, 1995.
Right.
We are on the campus of Leland Stanford Junior University. And if you've ever been there, you know it doesn't look like a normal school.
No, not at all. It feels different, almost like a resort.
Exactly. The flowers are blooming. You've got aloe, periwinkle, rock rose. It's this incredible pageant of life.
And the architecture is so distinct. That Mission Revival style, all sandstone and red tile roofs against this perfect California blue sky.
It's manicured perfection. A bubble.
It really is a bubble. And walking through this manicured perfection is a 21-year-old student.
Okay.
He's looking around, probably a bit critical of the layout. He has this vague, lingering Russian accent.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, his family fled Moscow when he was just 6 years old. They were escaping anti-Semitism.
Wow.
So he's brilliant, obviously, but he actually didn't want to be there. He wanted to go to MIT.
But MIT rejected him.
They did, so he has to settle for his backup plan. He ends up at Stanford. And as history, or maybe fate would have it, this young man is introduced to a campus guide.
His guide for the day.
Exactly. A slightly older graduate student from Michigan. And if you look at the record, the diaries, the later interviews, they didn't exactly hit it off.
That is putting it very, very mildly. They couldn't stand each other.
No, they thought the other one was obnoxious. They argued incessantly.
About what?
I mean, about everything. They argued about urban planning. They argued about the layout of the dorms. They argued about the weather.
Just clashing personalities.
Completely. But eventually, they stopped arguing long enough to realize they had a shared obsession.
And what was that?
They started using the Stanford servers to test a theory. They're looking at the World Wide Web, which at the time was this wild, untamed mess of information.
Right. This is the era of Alta Vista and maybe Ask Jeeves.
Yeah.
It was total chaos. You couldn't find anything.
Complete chaos. And they had this idea to look at academic citations, footnotes, as a way to measure relevance.
Okay, so like in a scientific paper.
Exactly. The idea being, if a lot of important papers cite your paper, then your paper's probably important too.
That makes sense.
They realized they could apply that exact same logic to web links.
So a link from one site to another is like a citation?
It's a vote of confidence. This method was elegant. It was wicked fast. And on September 15th, 1997, Larry Page and Sergey Brin register a domain name, Google.
And the rest, as they say, is history. But there is a very specific detail here, a financial kicker, that really sets the stage for everything we are going to discuss today.
Right. Because all this research happened on university servers, and because the university held the patent on the algorithm,
They owned a piece of it.
a big piece, Stanford University eventually received 1.8 million shares of Google stock.
Which is, I mean, I can't even do the math. That's a significant amount of money.
It is an endowment-altering amount of money. But here's the thing, it's not just Google. This single institution has incubated a technology sector that has completely transformed the planet. Companies run by Stanford alumni, you're talking HP, Cisco, Yahoo, Netflix, LinkedIn,
Giants.
trillions in revenue. There's this wild statistic that if Stanford alumni were a nation, they'd be the 10th largest economy in the world.
It is the cradle of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
It's the engine of the modern world. But here is the hook, and this is where it gets really interesting for us. We look at this ecosystem, this whole culture of move fast and break things, of disruption, of unimaginable wealth, and let's be honest, a lot of ethical ambiguity, and we think it's a modern phenomenon.
We think it started with the microchip or the internet.
Exactly. But the entire premise of this deep dive is that it didn't.
No. The argument from our sources, particularly the biography American Disruptor, is that this cultural and business genome, it isn't new at all.
It's an inheritance?
It is. It traces directly back to the man whose name is on the gate.
Leland Stanford.
The founder. And to understand the valley today, you have to understand the man. And that is surprisingly difficult because Leland Stanford is what the source calls an American Cohen.
A Cohen. Like a Zen riddle, a paradox.
Exactly. A paradox to be meditated on. On one hand, you have the founder of this incredibly prestigious university. You look at his official portraits and he looks titanic. He looks like a statesman.
Regal, almost.
Yeah. But when you dig into the record, into the primary documents and the letters from people who actually knew him, you find a very, very different person.
Okay.
You find a country boy, a ne'er-do-well, a man described by his contemporaries as phlegmatic and dull.
Phlegmatic and dull. That is not how we describe Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. We usually go with manic or visionary.
No, not at all. But this was a man who failed, and failed repeatedly. He was a flim-flam man, he was clumsy.
And yet,
This man created a monopoly that dwarfed the likes of Vanderbilt and Rockefeller. He set the template for the startup culture we see today. So the mission of this deep dive isn't just a biography, it's an investigation.
we're investigating the DNA of disruption itself.
We are. How did a clumsy lawyer who literally burned down his own office become an American disruptor? What were the ethical costs of his rise? And how did he engineer the Transcontinental Railroad through political maneuvering and just sheer audacity?
So let's unpack this. We have to start at the beginning,
Yeah.
the origin story. And it turns out even the name Stanford tells us something important about where he came from.
It really does. Today, the name Stanford just sounds aristocratic. It sounds like old money, East Coast elite.
Absolutely.
But if you go back 600 or 700 years to the origins of the name in England, it comes from Stone Ford.
Stone Ford, as in a place to cross a river.
Exactly, a rocky crossing in a stream. And the people who held this name originally weren't lords or ladies, they were peasants.
So, not exactly high society.
No, they were swine herders. They were people at the very bottom of the hierarchy, knee-deep in mud.
So the trajectory of this family is literally from swine herders to robber barons.
Yeah.
That's quite a climb.
Precisely. It's the ultimate ascent. And Leland Stanford's specific start begins in 1824. He's born at the Bull's Head Tavern in Waterloo, New York, right near Albany.
A tavern, not a farmhouse.
A tavern. And I want you to pause on that location for a second. He didn't grow up in a quiet library or some manor house. He grew up in a working tavern.
That's a very specific environment. It must have been loud, chaotic.
Extremely. A tavern in the 1820s was the hub of everything. News, gossip, commerce. It was the internet of its day. But more importantly, the Bull's Head was located right near the Erie Canal and the very first railways.
Ah, so he's watching the infrastructure of America being built from his bedroom window.
That is the key.
Huh.
He was witnessing the first great transportation revolution. Before this era, travel times were, they were medieval. The speed of life hadn't changed much since the Romans.
Right, you moved to the speed of a horse.
Or a boat.
Yeah.
But with the opening of the Erie Canal and the early steam trains, travel times just plummeted. A trip that took 20 days now took 8 days. The world was shrinking fast.
And the source makes a really interesting point here. It argues that being adjacent to prosperity, living near the road and the canal, seeing all that commerce flow by, that influenced his worldview more than any formal education ever could.
Because, to put it simply, he wasn't a good student. In fact, if we look at his work ethic as a child, it's shocking compared to the myth we have of these industrious 19th century tycoons.
We always imagine them up at 4 a.m., milking cows and reading by candlelight.
Not Leland. His own brother, Josiah Jr., flat out called him lazy.
His own brother.
Yeah. Josiah said that when there was work to be done on the farm, Leland would go around a corner.
He'd hide.
He would literally hide. If the brothers were fixing tools or harnessing teams of horses, Leland was just nowhere to be found.
So they had to go looking for him.
They'd have to call him, hunt him down, and he didn't seem to care if the work got done or not. He was just absent.
He was the original slacker.
He really was. And academically, it was a complete disaster. He bounced between schools, the Oneida Institute, the Clinton Liberal Institute, Casanova Seminary.
And what was his record like?
Terrible. He either dropped out or was expelled from all of them. He never graduated from a single one.
Now, there is one specific detail about his time at the Oneida Institute that I think is really telling, especially given the political profile he adopts later in life. Why did he leave Oneida?
This is a critical insight into his early character. Oneida was a very specific type of school. It was an abolitionist institute.
So very progressive for the 1840s.
Incredibly progressive. And Leland wrote to his father explaining why he left, and he was very blunt about it. He said he left because he refused to eat at the same table as black students.
Wow. Just straight up.
No ambiguity. It was a distinct prejudice. He transferred to another school simply to avoid that integration.
So it sets a baseline for his views on race. This wasn't just political opportunism later on?
No, it seems to have been rooted in a deeply held personal belief system from a young age.
Okay, so let's look at the resume so far. He's lazy, he's a dropout, and he holds these pretty stark prejudices. But he's a young man in the 1840s. He has to make a living. So what does a young man with no work ethic and no degree do?
He becomes a lawyer, of course.
Of course. the fallback plan for the aimless.
He claims to have read law in an Albany office, though the records are very sketchy on how much reading he actually did.
I'm guessing not a lot.
Probably not. But he passes the bar, most likely through family connections, and decides to head west. Not all the way west yet, but to the frontier. Port Washington, Wisconsin. This is 1848.
And this brings us to what I like to call the Wisconsin disaster. I mean, if you're writing the heroic screenplay of a tycoon, you don't usually include the part where he's the town drunk.
That's the reality, though. The locals in Port Washington, their descriptions of him survived. They called him clumsy and dull. He wasn't winning anyone over with his charisma.
Dull's such a damning word.
It is. But they did note one specific talent he had.
Which?
An affinity for drink. The source says he could stand up at the village bar, put all the other fellows to sleep, and then walk off with a clear head.
So he could outdrink everyone in town. That was his one skill.
It was his only superpower at the time, and professionally he was. Well, he was incompetent. There's a wonderful, if cringe-worthy, story about a man named Judge Hopewell Cox.
Oh, lay this one on us. This sounds good.
So Stanford is prosecuting a case. And instead of presenting evidence or making a coherent legal argument, he just starts rambling.
Oh, no.
He bores the court with a 40-minute harangue. He's just droning on, totally disconnected from the facts of the case.
40 minutes.
Finally, Judge Cox, who presumably has other things to do, just interrupts him. He tells Stanford he is wasting the court's time and dismisses the case right there on the spot.
And how does our future statesman, our future governor, handle this professional rejection?
He throws a tantrum, a full-on tantrum. Stanford insults the judge to his face, calls him names, and storms out of the courtroom.
He didn't.
He did. He yells, "I'll be damned if I ever appear again before such a judge."
It's almost comical. It's like a scene from a sitcom. But then tragedy strikes. Or maybe, it's karma catching up.
This is the nadir, the lowest point. It's 1852. A fire breaks out in the town.
A big one.
Big enough. It destroys his law office. It destroys the grocery store that was downstairs. And crucially, it burns his prized law books.
And why were the books so important?
On the frontier, your law books were your license. They were your entire reference library. Without them, you couldn't really practice. He is left with absolutely nothing.
He's 28 years old. His office is a pile of ash. He has no money. He's a failed lawyer in a small town.
And true to his form at the time, he doesn't fight back. He doesn't try to rebuild. He quits.
He just gives up.
He retreats back to Albany. He is, by every possible measure, a total failure.
So he goes back home with his tail between his legs.
But this is where the story pivots in a really interesting way. He gets married, right, to a woman named Jane Lathrop. He does. He marries Jane, or Jetty, as she was called. She was the daughter of a prosperous merchant in Albany. It was a good match for him, a step up.
Okay, so he's settling down.
You would think so, but immediately, and I mean immediately after the wedding, he leaves her.
Wait, what? He marries her and then just leaves?
He leaves her behind with her parents in Albany, and he takes off for California.
Why? I mean, what was the pull? Was it just the gold rush?
It was the gold rush. You have to remember, this is 1852. The news is everywhere. His brothers were already out there making money, sending letters back. Leland is the last one to the party. He's seeing everyone else get rich, and he's stuck in Albany, a failure. He had to go.
But the social stigma for Jenny must have been immense.
Oh, it was brutal. The gossip in Albany branded her a deserted wife. That was a heavy, shameful label in the 1850s. The source says she never forgave the town for that humiliation. It hardened her.
I can imagine. So Leland's now heading to California. And I think we forget, living in the age of airplanes where you can be there in 6 hours, just how terrifying that journey was.
It was a death trap, an absolute death trap. The source spends a lot of time describing the options for getting there, and none of them were good. If you wanted to get to the gold rush, you had to be willing to risk your life.
Let's break them down. What was option one?
Option one was Cape Horn, the all-water route.
Around South America.
All the way around the bottom of South America. That's 13,000 miles. You're trapped on a ship for months with bad food, bad water, disease. And then you have to navigate the Cape itself, where you're dealing with 90-foot waves.
90 feet.
It's one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the planet. There's an old sailor's adage, the source quotes, "Below 50 south, there is no God."
That's terrifying. Okay, so what's option two?
Option two, the overland route, the Oregon Trail.
The covered wagons.
Yeah, but forget the romantic image. The source calls it the death trek.
Why?
The diaries from that time are just incredibly graphic. They describe wolves digging up the shallow graves along the trail at night. People would find bodies, men, women, dragged through the mud.
I remember reading about the smell, the
Yeah.
sheer stench of it.
The stench of rotting livestock. Thousands upon thousands of oxen and horses died from exhaustion, and their carcasses would just lie there, bloat in the heat, and then burst. You were walking through a cloud of decay for months.
And the human cost.
Staggering. The saying was, cholera for breakfast, a shallow grave by lunch. That was the reality.
So Stanford looks at these options, the giant waves or the wolves and disease, and says, no thanks. He takes option 3.
He does. He takes the Panama, or in his case, the Nicaragua crossing.
How'd that work?
You take a steamship to Central America, you cross the isthmus through the jungle on mules and in canoes, and then you catch another steamship on the Pacific side.
Sounds risky.
It was expensive, but it was faster. But you were trading cholera for yellow fever, malaria, crocodiles in the rivers, and the ships themselves were a huge risk.
Shipwrecks.
Absolutely. In fact, the specific ship Stanford took to California, the Independence, gives us a perfect glimpse of the danger.
What happened to it?
He wasn't on the voyage where it sank, thankfully for him. But on a later voyage, that same ship, the captain ran it aground on a sandbar off Baja, California. The description is just horrific. The ship caught fire. You have women hanging by their skirts from the rigging as the ship burned beneath them, mothers throwing their children into the waves to save them from the fire.
And the source mentioned something about looters.
Looters on the beach, fighting over the corpses, washing ashore.
My God.
That is the world Stanford was entering. This wasn't a business trip, it was survival horror.
So he survives the journey. He makes it. He arrives in San Francisco in 1852. And if he thought Albany or Wisconsin was rough, he was in for a rude awakening.
A huge shock. San Francisco in 1852 was a dystopian boomtown. This was the Barbary Coast at its absolute wildest.
The source has this incredible description of the mud.
The mud was deep enough to swallow entire carts, and the city was overrun with rats the size of cats. It was a city of gambling hells and constant violence.
There was no real law enforcement.
No, just Judge Lynch. Vigilante justice. If the mob decided you were guilty of something, you were hanged from the nearest lamppost. No trial.
And we have to address the human element here that often gets glossed over in the romantic versions of the West.
We do. Human trafficking was open and rampant. The source describes Chinese women being openly sold on the docks, with police just standing by watching.
It was a society driven purely by greed and vice.
Completely. And so Stanford steps off the boat into this utter chaos. He's broke again. No ready money, as the source says, but this time he has a safety net.
His brothers.
His brothers. They were already established in Sacramento, and they had realized the fundamental truth of the gold rush.
Which was?
The real money wasn't in digging for gold. It was in mining the miners.
Selling supplies.
Exactly. Selling them the shovels, the picks, the flour, the whiskey, especially the whiskey.
So Leland goes to work for them.
He does. They send him up into the mountains, into the gold camps, first to a place called Cold Spring, then to another called Michigan City.
And he goes back to what he knows best.
The saloon business. He buys a place called the Empire Saloon. It's a general store and a bar.
A classic combination.
And because there's no real law up in the mountains either, he becomes the justice of the peace.
Wait, really?
Yeah. He's serving drinks with one hand and running a court from the end of the bar with the other.
That is the most Wild West thing I have ever heard. You're guilty. Now who wants a shot of whiskey?
That was essentially it, but this is also where we see the environmental devastation firsthand. The miners were using a technique called hydraulic mining.
What's that?
They were basically blasting the mountainsides with these enormous high-pressure water cannons to wash away the soil and get to the gold deposits underneath.
And this caused a literal catastrophe for Stanford's town, didn't it?
It did. Michigan City literally slid down the mountain.
The whole town.
The whole town. The ground became so unstable from all the hydraulic mining that it just gave way. The town was destroyed by the very method that was being used to extract its wealth.
It's a powerful metaphor for the whole extractive nature of his early career.
It really is.
So he fails again, in a way. His town slides away. But he does manage to make enough money to finally bring Jenny out from Albany.
He does. He retrieves her in 1855. They settle in Sacramento. And it's worth noting, they are not living in luxury.
No.
The source says they are living in a house with furniture made of crates.
Crate furniture, so they're still bootstrapping it.
Very dorm room chic. But this period really marks the transition for him. He stops being the lazy youth, and he becomes the hardened survivor. And he's about to meet the men who will change his life and the country forever.
The associates. The big four.
This is the team. You can't tell the Stanford story without Huntington, Hopkins, and Crocker. It's like a heist movie cast, each with a very specific skill set.
Okay, let's introduce them. Who are these guys?
First, you have Collis B. Huntington. He's the brains and the brawn of the operation, a ruthlessly efficient hardware store owner.
What was his talent?
He could supposedly memorize the wholesale price of every single item in his store. He was a human calculator. And he was tough. He once bragged, "I could whip any boy in school." He was the shark. Pure aggression and calculation.
Okay, so he's the tough guy. Who's next?
Then you have Mark Hopkins. He was the balance wheel.
A balance wheel.
He was the exact opposite of Huntington. Quiet, meticulous, a vegetarian. He was detailed bookkeeper who kept the whole enterprise from imploding. He didn't speak much, but when he did, everyone listened.
The voice of reason.
Exactly. Then there's Charles Crocker.
What was his role?
Crocker was the bull. He was a huge man, 250 pounds, loud, boisterous. He was a former dry goods merchant, and his specialty was handling men. He was the brute force who would eventually drive the work crews building the railroad.
So you have the shark, the balance wheel, and the bull. And then you have Leland Stanford. What did he bring to the table?
He was the face. He was the politician. They brought him in specifically because he had political ambition and this kind of Albany Dutch reliability. He looked the part.
What do you mean?
He was tall, he was heavyset, he spoke slowly, which people often mistook for wisdom, and he was approachable. He was the guy they could put in front of the legislature.
And they formed a business structure that is just baffling to modern lawyers.
It's incredible. They never had a formal written agreement, not once. It was a unique venture in financial history. It was all built on a handshake and a shared ruthless desire for dominance.
And their first big move wasn't a business deal. It was a political pivot.
That's right. The political landscape was shifting, the old Whig Party was dying, the know-nothings were fading away, and a new party was rising, the Republican Party.
So Stanford joins up.
He does. He sees an opportunity.
Now, we need to pause here and look at the platform. Because as we said, when we hear Republican Party of Lincoln, we think of abolition. But Stanford's platform in California wasn't exactly equality for all.
No. We have to report this clearly because it's in the record. Stanford's political platform in California was explicitly white supremacist.
We have quotes on this, right?
We do. In his acceptance speech for the nomination for governor, he said, and this is a direct quote, "I prefer the white man to the Negro. I am in favor of free white American citizens."
Wow. There's no ambiguity there.
None. He was also vehemently anti-Chinese immigration, at least politically. He called them the dregs of Asia and argued that their presence would turn California into a land of serfs.
Which is a massive, massive irony, considering what happens just a few years later.
The ultimate irony. He was anti-Chinese immigration politically, but he would later rely entirely on Chinese labor to build his fortune. He didn't let his stated ideology get in the way of his profits.
So he's running for office on this platform. How does he do?
The losing streak continues. He runs for alderman in Sacramento and gets a whopping 87 votes.
87.
Then he runs for state treasurer and loses. Then he runs for governor and loses that too. He's persistent, I'll give him that. But he just kept losing.
But while he's failing in politics, the Big Four are cooking up a much bigger plan. The grand scheme. The Transcontinental Railroad.
This is where the story shifts from local Sacramento business to national destiny. And it all starts with a brilliant, obsessive visionary named Theodore Judah.
Crazy Judah.
That's what they called him, Crazy Judah. He was an engineer, and he was obsessed with the idea of building a railroad over the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Which everyone thought was impossible.
Everyone. They said you couldn't get a train over those peaks. They're too steep, too much snow. Judah didn't listen. He hiked it himself, surveyed it, mapped it, and found the one viable route.
So he has the plan. He just needs the money.
Right. So he pitches his idea to all the big money financiers in San Francisco, and they all laugh him out of the room. They think he's nuts.
So he turns to the Sacramento merchants.
He turns to the small-timers. He pitches it to Huntington, Stanford, Hopkins, and Crocker, and they see the potential. But not just for transport, they see the real prize.
Government subsidies.
Government subsidies. This is the Silicon Valley connection again. Getting government money to fund a private monopoly. It's the original model.
So Judah goes to Washington to lobby for the project.
He does. And in a move that would be unthinkable today, he becomes the clerk for the congressional committees that are writing the railroad bill while he is lobbying for the Central Pacific.
Wait. He's writing the bill that gives money to his own company?
It's a massive conflict of interest, an absolutely enormous one, but that's how it worked. And this leads directly to the Pacific Railway Act of 1862.
Let's break down the subsidy structure,
Yeah.
because this is where the scam really begins.
Okay. The government agreed to pay the railroad companies in two ways. Government bonds, which were basically taxpayer-funded loans, and huge grants of public land.
And the payments were by the mile.
By the mile. You got $16,000 in bonds for every mile of track you laid on flat land. But you got $48,000 for every mile you laid in the mountains.
3 times the money for mountains.
Exactly. 3 times the money. So naturally, the Big Four looked at that math and decided they needed more mountains.
But you can't just create mountains. They are where they are.
No, but you can redefine them legally. This is the moving mountains fraud.
Okay, explain this.
The Big Four needed cash, and they needed it fast. So they went to Washington and lobbied to legally redefine where the Sierra Nevada mountains officially started.
Geologically, where do they start?
Geologically, the foothills, the actual slope, starts significantly east of Sacramento. But the Big Four hired their own geologists to write a report claiming the mountains started at a place called Arcade Creek.
And where is Arcade Creek?
It's flatland. It is 10 miles east of Sacramento. It is undeniably, unequivocally flat. If you stand there today, it looks like a suburb.
So by moving the start of the mountains on paper, they could.
They could charge the government the triple mountain rate for miles and miles of perfectly flat terrain.
How much extra money did that make them right off the bat?
It netted them an extra $192,000 immediately. That's millions in today's money. And the kicker, President Lincoln approved it.
Honest Abe, why would he do that?
He allegedly quipped something about being a lawyer and understanding the power of a good argument, or about moving mountains. But the truth is, the government was desperate. It was the middle of the Civil War, and they needed that railroad built to keep California in the Union. They were willing to look the other way.
And how did Theodore Judah, the idealist engineer, the visionary, feel about all this?
He was horrified. Absolutely horrified. He saw that fake construction contracts, the overcharging, the blatant fraud. He realized the Big Four didn't care about building a great railroad. They cared about milking the government for every last cent.
So what happened to him?
The associates forced him out. It was a boardroom coup. They saw him as a liability, an obstacle to their profits.
Did he fight back?
He tried. They offered him a buyout of $100,000. Judah took the money, but his plan was to sail to the East Coast, find new, more ethical backers like the Vanderbilts, and buy the Big Four out. He wanted to save his railroad from them.
But he never made it.
No, it's a genuine tragedy. On the voyage east, crossing the Isthmus of Panama, he contracted yellow fever. He died in New York at the age of 37.
Leaving the Big Four in total unchecked control.
In total control of the company, the government money, and the entire narrative. Judah was erased from the story.
So now they have the money, they have the railroad, and their only moral compass is gone. All they need now is absolute political power.
And in 1861, in the midst of the secession crisis, Leland Stanford finally wins.
He becomes the governor of California.
And this creates the ultimate, most blatant conflict of interest imaginable. He is simultaneously the governor of California and the president of the Central Pacific Railroad.
Can you imagine that today? The governor is also the CEO of the biggest government contractor in the state.
It would be an immediate impeachment, a massive scandal, but back then it was just business.
And did he abuse that power?
Shamelessly. He signed state bills that directly benefited his own company. He pushed counties and cities to use taxpayer money to buy stock in his railroad, often under duress.
So he's using the power of the state to fund his private enterprise.
Exactly. The source quotes a contemporary saying, "It was this mixing in politics that made the officers of the company so unpopular."
That is an epic understatement. They were hated. They were seen as a giant octopus with its tentacles wrapped around the state, squeezing every drop of wealth out of it.
And Stanford didn't help his public image with his lifestyle choices.
No, that crate furniture didn't last long.
Not at all. Immediately upon gaining power, he moves out of that modest house. He buys a massive Renaissance revival mansion in Sacramento, and he just keeps expanding it, adding wings, making it more and more opulent. It was incredibly ostentatious. He was showing everyone, "I have arrived."
And the backdrop to all of this, as you said, is the Civil War.
That's crucial context. The war provided the perfect cover and the perfect sense of urgency. The railroad was sold to the public as a patriotic necessity.
To keep California and all its gold and silver in the Union.
Precisely. And speaking of silver, you have the discovery of the Comstock lode in Nevada. The associates didn't bother mining the silver themselves.
No. Why get your hands dirty?
Exactly. They just built the transport monopoly to service the mines. They controlled how everything got in and how all the silver got out. They owned the platform.
The platform model.
Yeah.
It really is the same playbook.
It's the exact same playbook.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we have to look at the verdict. Stanford transformed from the man who burned down his own law office to the man who literally moved mountains with a pen stroke.
It's an incredible, almost unbelievable transformation. But we also have to look at the cost.
The ethical cost.
Yes. The vast wealth that he and the Big Four accumulated was built on public risk, those taxpayer bonds. It was built on the seizure of indigenous land granted to them by the government. And it was built on a transportation monopoly that squeezed California farmers and merchants for decades.
And that brings us to the legacy, the provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
If we connect this all back to the very start of our conversation, that anecdote about Google, the Silicon Valley connection.
Go on.
Leland Stanford practiced the fake it till you make it strategy long before that was a tech slogan. He manipulated data like the geographical location of a mountain to secure funding. He pivoted from one failed venture to the next until one hit. He disrupted an entire industry through political connections and graft.
And Stanford University, the cradle of Silicon Valley, was built on this fortune.
It was. It was built on a fortune derived from government subsidies, ruthless monopoly power, and the exploitation of the very immigrant laborers that Stanford himself publicly denounced.
So the question is the DNA of modern tech disruption, the good, the bad, and the ethically ambiguous, simply an inheritance? Is it the legacy of Leland Stanford's scandalous life?
That is the question. When we look at the ethical gray areas of big tech today, the monopolies, the political influence, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised. Maybe it's in the blood of the place.
A fascinating, if troubling, legacy. And that is it for this deep dive into the life of Leland Stanford. It's a story of failure, fraud, and the founding of a new American era.
Always more to learn.
We'll catch you on the next one.